Giridharadhari. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Kala Chanji Radha Kala Chanji Radhe. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Good morning, devotees. My name is Manjari Gopika Devi Dasi. Today we will be hearing from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 28, verses 1 through 27, focusing on verse 25. I ask for your blessings that I may speak something pleasing to my spiritual master, to Srila Prabhupada, and to all of the devotees. Let us begin by all together chanting the invocation prayers. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narotimam devim sarvasvatim vyasyam tato jayamudirayet. Nashta prayesha badreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamashloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. It's always very nice, but very humbling to be here with all of you. I prefer sitting back there. But it's a very interesting verse we'll be hearing from today. So we're starting a new chapter entitled Puranjana Becomes a Woman in the Next Life. So we are to cover 27 verses. In the interest of time, rather than reading aloud all 27 verses, I'm going to summarize, and we'll read about 10 of them. So, so here we are, chapter 28 of the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sage Narada Muni has been, and continues to, narrate the story of King Puranjana to King Pratinibarshit. Narada Muni wants to give King Pratinibarshit advice, some instruction and spiritual guidance, but instead of telling the king directly, he uses an allegorical story of King Puranjana. Sometimes when we try to give people advice, they get a little defensive, and once you're defensive, you stop hearing. So he's using this wonderfully detailed story about this other king who was living life in a certain way and ended up facing some difficulties. In today's section of the allegorical story, King Puranjana's city is, the city is representing the human body and his body in particular. So the city is attacked by the forces of time and old age, represented by Kalakanya and the soldiers of the Yavana king. Despite his efforts to protect his city, Puranjana is overwhelmed due to his excessive attachment to material pleasures and to his family. As Kalakanya's influence grows, Puranjana loses his beauty, intelligence, wealth, and his family members. Ultimately, the city is set ablaze, and he is taken away by the Yavanas, who represent the Amadutas. In his final moments, we'll hear that Puranjana does not remember the supersoul, and instead suffers from the consequences of his past actions, and remains in the darkness of material existence due to his material attachments and ignorance. Let us begin today with verse 17. So we'll read 17 through 27. So here, King Puranjana is on his deathbed. And who would like to begin reading? We can all take turns, and then we'll come back to verse 25.
King Puranjana was overly attached to his family and conceptions of I and mine. Because he was overly attracted to his wife, he was already quite poverty-stricken. At the time of separation, he became very sorry.
King Puranjana was anxiously thinking, "Alas, my wife is encumbered by so many children. When I pass from this body, how will she be able to maintain all these family members? Alas, she'll be greatly harassed by thoughts of family maintenance."
King Puranjana then began to think of his past dealings with his wife. He recalled that his wife would not take her dinner until he had finished his, that she would not take her bath until he had finished his, and that she was always very much attached to him, so much so that if he would sometimes become angry and chastise her, she would simply remain silent and tolerate his misbehavior.
King Puranjana continued thinking how, when he was in a state of bewilderment, his wife could give him a good counsel, and how she would become aggrieved when he was away from home. Although she was the mother of so many sons and heroes, the king still feared that she would not be able to maintain the responsibility of household affairs.
King Puranjana continued worrying. After I pass from this world, how will my sons and daughters, who are now fully dependent on me, live and continue their lives? Their position will be similar to that of passengers aboard a ship wrecked in the midst of the ocean.
Although King Puranjana should not have lamented over the fate of his wife and children, he nonetheless did so due to his miserly intelligence. In the meantime, Yavana Raja, whose name was Fear itself, immediately drew near to arrest him.
When the Yavanas were taking King Puranjana away to their place, blinding him like an animal. The king's followers became greatly aggrieved. While they lamented, they were forced to go along with him.
The serpent, who had already been arrested by the soldiers of Yavanaraj and was out of the city, began to follow his master along with the others. As soon as they all left the city, it was immediately dismantled and smashed to dust.
When King Puranjana was being dragged with great force by the powerful Yavana, out of his gross ignorance, he still could not remember his friend and well-wisher, the Supersoul.
The most unkind King Puranjana has killed many animals in various sacrifices. Now, taking advantage of this opportunity, all these animals began to pierce him with their horns. It was as though he were being cut to pieces by axes.
Due to his contaminated association with women, a living entity like King Puranjana eternally suffers all the pangs of material existence and remains in the dark region of material life, bereft of all remembrance of many, many years, for many, many years.
What a way to start the morning, huh? Let's return to verse 25. We'll chant the Sanskrit, and then you repeat. Vikrishamana prasabam Yavananena baliyasa Navindattamasavishta Sakayam suhridam pura. Would anyone else like to chant? Vikrishyamana prasabam Yavanena baliyasa Navindattamasavishta Sakayam suridam pura. Vikrishamana prasabam Yavanena baliyasa Navindattamasavishta Sakayam suhridam pura. Vikrishamana prasabam Yavanena baliyasa Navindattamasavishta Sakayam suhridam pura. Okay, let's do the synonyms together. Vikrishamanaha, being dragged. Prasabam, forcibly. Yavanena, by the Yavana. Baliyasa, who was very powerful. Na avindat, could not remember. Tamasa, by darkness of ignorance. Avishta, being covered. Sakayam, his friend. Suhridam, always a well-wisher. Puraha, from the very beginning. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. when King Puranjana was being dragged with great force by the powerful Yavana, out of his gross ignorance he still could not remember his friend and well-wisher, the Supersoul. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In Bhagavad Gita 5.29, Lord Krishna says, Bhuktaram yagyatapasam sarvaloka maheshvaram suhridam sarvabhutanam gyatfamam shantim richati. A person can be in full Krishna consciousness and become happy and satisfied if he knows but three things. Namely, that the Supreme Lord Krishna is the enjoyer of all benefits, that he is the proprietor of everything, and that he is the supreme friend of all living entities. If one does not know this and functions instead under the bodily conception, he is always harassed by the tribulations offered by material nature. In actuality, the Supreme Lord is sitting by the side of everyone. Ishvara sarvabhutanam hriddeshe arjuna tishtati. Bhagavad Gita 18.61. The living entity and the supersoul are sitting side by side in the same tree. But despite being harassed by the laws of material nature, the foolish living entity does not turn toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead for protection. However, he thinks that he is able to protect himself from the stringent laws of material nature. This, however, is not possible. The living entity must turn toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrender unto him. Only then will he be saved from the onslaught of the powerful Yavana, or Yamaraj. The word Sakhayam, friend, is very significant in this verse because God is eternally present beside the living entity. The Supreme Lord is also described as Suhridam, ever well-wisher. The Supreme Lord is always a well-wisher, just like a mother or father. Despite all the offenses of a son, the father and mother are always the son's well-wisher. Similarly, despite all our offenses and defiance of the desires of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord will give us immediate relief from all the hardships offered by material nature if we simply surrender unto him, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Mameva ye prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. Unfortunately, due to our bad association and great attachment to sense gratification, we do not remember our best friend, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So these verses are kind of, at one glance, really they're painful to read, the section we read. There's so much suffering in it. But this verse is actually very uplifting because we're hearing how we have a friend who's with us all the time. We're never actually alone. A couple weeks ago, I was here in this same place speaking about Paramatma. Today we're going to talk more about Paramatma, as explained in this verse and purport. In Bhagavad Gita 15.15, Lord Krishna explains that he is seated in everyone's heart as Paramatma, and from him come knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So the fact is that every living entity is eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. That's also in Bhagavad Gita 15.7. And so both are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has the tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate material nature. And because the living entity has this tendency, they are called the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can either be situated in the material energy or the spiritual energy. But as long as the living entity is conditioned by material energy, the Lord, as his friend, the Supersoul, stays with him just to get him back to the spiritual energy. The Lord is always eager to take us back to the spiritual energy, but the living entity is continually rejecting his association. This misuse of independence, it's stated it's the cause of material strife in material nature. So Krishna is waiting for us to turn to him. The Katha Upanishad says there are two birds sitting on the same tree. One bird is gobbling up the fruit that's coming from karma, and the other is just sitting and watching, waiting for the gobbling bird to turn his face toward him. Paramatma travels with us lifetime after lifetime, waiting for us to turn toward him. It's interesting, the beginning of the Vedanta Sutra, the Brahma Sutra, is the famous aphorism, Ata Brahma Jigyaso, which is translated to, and now is the time to inquire about the absolute truth. Or sometimes it's translated as, now therefore, or therefore inquire. When we break down that word, atato, it's a compound word. So we should think, why does it start with and therefore? Why are we beginning the Brahma Sutra with and now? When we say and now, we're acknowledging that something has preceded this moment. For example, if I say, and now it's time for me to put away the groceries, that implies that other activities came before, and this is the next step. So how is this possible? The very first words of the Brahma Sutra, the very, very, very beginning of the sutras, we're saying and now. How do we make sense of this? Only the acharyas can explain. It means now you have this human form, therefore now inquire. Who are you? Who is God? What is your relationship with him? And what is the goal of life? The Supersoul is waiting for us to now inquire. And the moment you show interest, the moment that bird turns his face, Supersoul helps. He paves the way, and he puts you on the path to meet the Vartma Pradarsha Guru, then the Shiksha Guru, and then the Diksha Guru. This is the process, but the soul must inquire. And when you do, the Supersoul is pleased, and he helps you. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada quotes a famous verse. It was so beautiful. Everyone here in the temple room, we all sang it together because it's so famous. It's Bhagavad Gita 5.29. And this verse is known as, thank you, the peace formula. The peace formula. In the purport of that verse, Prabhupada famously writes, the greatest peace formula is simply this. Krishna is the beneficiary of all human sacrifices. We should offer everything to the transcendental service of the Lord because he's the proprietor of everything. He's the proprietor of everything we see. He's the proprietor of the demigods. No one is greater than him. He's greater than the greatest of the demigods, Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. But under the spell of illusion, the living entities are themselves trying to be lords of everything they're surveying. Instead of looking at it and going, oh, this belongs to Krishna, we're saying this belongs to me. We're coming up with that I, me, mine. But unfortunately, we're not supreme, and we're under the rules of the material energy. So as long as we're trying to think that we're the lords, while we're actually being subjugated to the rules of material nature, we're going to suffer, because there's no harmony there. And Prabhupada says it's a peace formula because unless you can understand that, there'll be no peace for you as a person, and there'll be no peace for society. And I was thinking, although I admit it does not usually feel great that I'm not in control, and the world does not move according to my desires, I have to acknowledge that there's some peace in knowing that. We celebrated His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj's Vyasa Puja a couple days ago on Tuesday. And for Bhagavatam class that morning, we listened to this brilliant lecture from him. And I took notes, and he was discussing how Lord Chaitanya's mercy extinguishes the fires of material life, extinguishes all the sufferings and the karma. But he said, in the beginning, he said, even devotees in the beginning stages of this process, we suffer, right? But he said, but even the devotees in the beginning stages are not suffering in the same way as karmis. And I certainly have found that to be true, because we have, Krishna is the Supreme Lord, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, and this understanding, it helps devotees realize that everything in existence is under his control and protection. And that gives us not necessarily a sense of comfort, right? But I mean like literal comfort, but it does give us a sense of security, and it gives us proper eyes with which to see the movings and workings of the world. And for many, many years, I certainly didn't have that. So 529, I want to discuss these words because they're relevant to the purport. The Sanskrit here, Bhoktaram, enjoyer of all sacrifices. Krishna reiterates that in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, verse 24, when he says, literally, I am the enjoyer of all sacrifices. He could not be more clear. But he is the supreme enjoyer because, as we discussed, he's the supreme master. And Krishna is the ultimate recipient of all acts of sacrifice and austerity. So this means that all the pious activities performed are ultimately meant to please him. They're not meant for us to have a nicer house or car or go to a higher planet. They exist simply to please him. And that gives us a higher purpose. And that gives us fulfillment. And in that way, we find part of that peace formula Srila Prabhupada is talking about. Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam, Krishna is the supreme benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, which is also stated in today's verse. He cares. Krishna cares for every living entity. He wants us to come back. He gives us the ways to do that, and he desires their ultimate welfare. King Pranjana and us, we both think in terms of me and mine. We think my parents, my children, my husband. But what happens to King Pranjana? He leaves his body and his children and his wife and his city. They don't go with him. And it's painful sometimes to think about, but it's the same for us. Our parents, our children, our spouses, they weren't there in our past life, and they won't be going with us into the next life if we transfer to another body. Only Krishna, as Paramatma, stays with us. He lets us neglect him, and he lets us forget him for thousands of years, and he doesn't even resent us for it. He stays with us, and he just keeps waiting for us to turn toward him. In today's Bhagavatam verse, Paramatma is described as Sakhayam, friend, and Suhridam, ever well-wisher. Does that phrase sound familiar to anyone? Dustin, you're nodding. Why does that phrase sound familiar? Yes. Prabhupada often signed his letters with your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And that's so sweet. In the last class I gave on Paramatma, we discussed how everything that a pure devotee does, every word that they speak, every line that they write, is directly dictated by the Super Soul. So it's lovely to think about how the Super Soul was telling Srila Prabhupada to write that, and that's actually a term for Super Soul, I think. So our friend, our ever well-wisher, knows everything about us, and he permits only that what the soul deserves until the soul surrenders to Krishna. He just keeps waiting, and he just gives us what the karma deserves. In Bhagavad Gita 13:23, Krishna says, as Paramatma, I am the permitter. So the Paramatma is present in the heart to give you the results of your past karma life as you progress. In 1861, Krishna tells Arjuna, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart, Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. So as we change bodies, the living entity forgets his past deed as he takes on a new body, but the super soul remembers the past deeds. And the super soul remains the witness and just continues to guide based on the past karma. So the living entity gets what he deserves, gets a new material body, which is under the creation of the super soul, and they have to work under the spell of that bodily situation. But so the super soul is neutral, right? But as soon as we turn our face, he will not stay neutral. As soon as we turn our face toward him, he turns towards us. Prior to that, he's just like dealing cards, right? Shuffling the deck, this is what you get. But as soon as you turn towards him, he stops. Game over. Now he's here to help. Now he's really, you're ready, I'm ready too. I'm going to bring you back. But we have to surrender. Sanatana Goswami is the Sambandha Acharya of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Sambandha means relationship. In Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 20, chapter 20, verse 102, Sanatana Goswami asked Lord Chaitanya, "Who am I? Why do the threefold miseries always give me trouble? What is the goal of life and the process for attaining it?" And Lord Chaitanya explains to him in a very famous verse following that the constitutional position of the living entity is that of Krishna's eternal servant. And because the living entities have forgotten this, that's why they suffer the threefold miseries. And Srila Sanatana Goswami, he really brilliantly elaborates this Sambandha Tattva in what's considered his masterpiece, which is the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. And in that, Narada Muni travels through all the universes, meeting with pure devotees. And he learns and he sees how the pure devotees all each have a special, unique relationship with Krishna. Rupa Goswami is the Abhideya Acharya for us, because he gives us the process of bhakti yoga, particularly in nectar devotion. Raghunath Das Goswami is considered the Prayojana Acharya. Prayojana means the goal, and the goal is Krishna Prem. And Raghunath Das Goswami wrote several works, but he's really most considered our Prayojana Acharya based on his example, because he lived a life of complete renunciation and complete surrender to his guru, Lord Chaitanya, and a complete dedication to the pastimes of Radha Krishna. So our goal is Krishna Prem. The process is Bhakti Yoga, but Sambandha is the starting step, turning your face to the Super Soul. He will reveal the answer to those questions of who you are, what is your relationship, and he does that through Guru, through Sadhu, and Shastra. And then he reveals the goal, Krishna Prem. But he does that through the process of Bhakti Yoga, through the same Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna instructs us from within as Paramatma, and from without as Shastra and Guru. So that's the beginning. We have to inquire. Ata Brahma Yagyaso, who am I? Who is God? What is my relationship with him? And to the degree the soul surrenders, to that degree he reveals in depth. Ye yata mam prapadyante. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So a couple more thoughts here. So the super soul is like the branch manager. If you ever work for, I work in corporate America. I have for all of my young life, for better or for worse. But when you have a real problem, like, or there's just news to share, the CEO doesn't like drive to the regional office and tell you like all the things that have happened in the month or that quarter, and then like the new goals are and the new policies. The CEO does not do that. He sends that information to the regional branch manager, and the regional branch manager will sit down with you and tell you all of these things. So Krishna is the CEO. If he has something to reveal, he does it through the super soul first. And then the more and more we surrender, the more direct our reciprocation is. Lastly, before we close, I'd like to take note of the final line in the purport of today's verse, where Srila Prabhupada explains that, unfortunately, due to our bad association and great attachment for sense gratification, we cannot remember our best friend, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I was thinking then, how can we lessen our attachment to sense gratification and remember our best friend? If the cause of forgetfulness is bad association, then the opposite must be true. The cause for remembrance is good association. That's the whole purpose of our society, right? Prabhupada established our society, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. The society keeps us Krishna conscious. It helps us remember. And Prabhupada himself wrote, "To save human civilization from the darkness of ignorance, this movement was started. The main purpose of the Krishna consciousness movement is to enlighten the living entity and remind him of his original Krishna consciousness." That's what I have prepared. So I'd like to hear from you. If anybody has any questions or comments, maybe somebody could even reflect on how Paramatma got them here to this temple room today. Something I think about quite a bit, actually. One second, Prabhu. Let's give you the mic.
this past year, I hadn't been to the temple in like 1 year because I was like trying out all sorts of like random things, you know. I tried to go to college for like some career, and then I tried to start a business. I tried to like get an apartment and stuff, but Krishna was like, "No, I have better plans for you, you know, and I'm glad I'm here." All like for example, the two apartments I got, one of them like flooded, the the other one the boiler exploded, and it was like,
Wow.
yeah, that was like a clear sign that it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Haley?
Hare Krishna. Thank you. This is such a beautiful class, and I just have a reflection and then also a question. I was reflecting. This verse reminds me. I was listening to some of Mary, like Jesus' disciples, Mary, some of her prayers, and she was praying mostly about Jesus, but probably within her heart as well, talking about how she was in kind of like this darkness of ignorance, and she couldn't hear or see him. But then she said that he was with her the whole time, like because the darkness is not dark to him. So it really reminded me that even when we go through our dark, tough times, that it's not darkness for God in our heart. He's like still there no matter what. So this kind of reminded me of that.
Thank you.
And then I have a question kind of like on his situation. I mean, when we've been practicing for a certain period of time, there are things like difficulties that come up and we might not understand, like, is Krishna trying to test my faith here if I'll keep going, or is he trying to show me that this is wrong, like this I shouldn't be going this direction? So how do we try to understand? And you know, not all of us might have guru, or we don't understand Shastra correctly. So, because usually people will say Guru Sadhu Shastra, but yeah, can you just elaborate a little more how we can go through that process?
Probably someone could answer that better than me. I was going to say Guru Sadhu Shastra. Well, I think that's very personal, you know. We all do have our karmas that we won't understand because we don't remember anything from our past life. Even as Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj said in that lecture, it was like, you know, just because you become a devotee doesn't mean like all your material miseries stop. But we just have the proper vision really to deal with them and to move in the world. But I think probably when we look at something like this, Prabhu was sharing, like he was trying out different ventures and nothing was working, and this apartment didn't last, and then that department didn't last. There probably is another piece of your heart that had this temple as an option, right? Or moving, there was some part of you that was saying, I think there's something else, but we keep pushing back against it. And so that takes a lot of reflection. And Paramatma also acts as our conscience. When we feel guilty about something, that is Paramatma. That is Paramatma saying, this isn't who you really are. You shouldn't be doing this. It is also said that if you continually push back against that conscience, like you continue to steal or something, right? The more you do it, usually the bolder a thief becomes, and they stop hearing Paramatma. And when you do that, he stops talking. So anyway, we have these little whispers inside of us. It really does benefit to have someone that you could talk to one-on-one, because a lot of these things are personal, you know. And I remember Srila, His Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj, someone asked him, I was listening to a class, someone said something like, you know, I think they had become a devotee, and they were trying to get a family member to chant, and the family member had been chanting for some time, probably a few months, but they still weren't happy. And Giriraj Swami said, well, the point of chanting the holy name is it's not that you're going to be like happy. It doesn't mean that your life is going to become perfect. We're just reestablishing that relationship. But anyway, maybe Prabhupada can say something more profound.
Just quickly I do want to hear, but also on that, I remember someone in Gita Nagari told me that this chant and be happy, it doesn't mean chant to be happy. It
Right.
means just be happy chanting. Like,
yes, be happy that you have
by
this
that.
process and
I
chant.
was like, whoa, mind blowing.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, that was an interesting question. We are supposed to follow Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, but if I don't have a guru and I don't ever understand Shastra, and maybe I have doubts about the sadhus, then what am I going to do? So, yeah, devotees can have a lot of anxiety about the future, because we don't know, what should I do? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go here? Should I go there? What's going to happen? Oh, Krishna, please. So, when we're in that state of just total unknown, like lack of clarity, the best thing to do, which I've been advised to do and which I've found works for me, is just take it day by day. Like, don't stress out about the future. Just be like, all right, I have no idea what Krishna's plan is for me, but I have total faith that he will reveal it eventually. But for now, because I really can't do anything about it, I'm just going to do my best each day. I'm going to get up, do the morning program, chant attentive japa, do my services responsibly, try to have good relationship with the devotees, honor prasadam, and just be simple and be patient and wait for Krishna to reveal those things to us, to bring people into our lives. And also, just because we're not initiated, we don't have like a Diksha Guru, doesn't mean that we don't have devotees around us who can act as Shiksha Gurus and help us. We can sit down and talk to someone and just get some kind of, if not clarity, but at least solace or comfort, knowing that someone cares and is there for us. So, yeah, just take it day by day. It has worked for me.
Thank you.
I just wanted to share like a reflection, because I read this pastime on my own, and it's one of those that have affected me the most. I don't know, especially when you get to this part, when you start to see the super soul coming in the picture. I don't know, I guess I'm just realizing that I've been ignoring him this whole time, and I don't know, it gets me like emotional to think that there has been this friend there this whole time, and I'm just finally starting to pay attention to him. And yeah, there was one night, I'm not going to go into detail, but there was a night where I was really afraid, and I felt really kind of a little bit like in danger, and I was like alone. And at first I was just kind of nervous. I was like, I need to get out of here. But I couldn't really go anywhere. I didn't really feel like I could go anywhere. And all of a sudden I just like remembered Krishna. At first I wasn't thinking about it. At first I was just like my own protection. Then I just remembered Krishna. I was like, you know what, Krishna is there. You're there with me. He's there. He's protecting his devotees. And I felt such a relief, actually. I actually like felt so much more calm. And I just ended up being able to just fall back asleep. And that was okay. So this process really works, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
When you were sharing just now, it reminded me of we were in Govardhan like almost 2 years ago now, and I had been in Vrindavan for almost a month leading up to that, and we were going to Govardhan Hill with Purijan Prabhu and a group of some of my dear friends, and Purijan Prabhu has this process that he'll do where he kind of asks you to introduce yourself to Govardhan and to make a personal connection and tell him about who you are. And of course he knows everything, but personally, quietly as a group, each one introduce yourself. And so I was kind of in my head thinking, oh wow, this sounds like magical. Like this is amazing, after being in Vrindavan for a month and being brought by Purijan Prabhu to Govardhan Hill. And so I got there and with all my friends, and I'm sitting in front of Govardhan and I'm kind of trying to really give everything I can to that. And I was getting like nothing. It was like silence, like less reciprocation than I get like sitting here in the temple room in front of Radha Kalachandji. It was like, I was so bewildered, and I was just like really confused, like what's going on. And what Ajit Prabhu was saying about, kind of ignoring that friend for so long and not really, being so consistent in developing that relationship. And then I had this expectation. It would be like if you had a very close friend, if like I didn't speak to Jagaranga Prabhu for like 10 years and I just showed up at his door and I was like, I'm here, let's hang out. He'll be like, are you crazy? Like, what's wrong with you? You know, like, and then that hit me as I was leaving the hill, like, oh wow, you gotta be consistent. You gotta like, you know, develop that relationship if you want that to be there. Krishna as a person also. And yeah, so that reminded me of what you said, reminded me of that pastime. Or not pastime.
No, thank
that
you.
experience.
That's a good realization. You look like you have something to say. That's good. That's good.
Hare Krishna. I guess just kind of going back to reemphasize like this one question of where like his example, it was more clear because maybe it was more like materialistic things that were guiding him, like that were ending to try to guide him towards, you know, a temple or something. But even when we're in Krishna consciousness, we do have things that, you know, something won't work out or it will become difficult, but it's still within Krishna consciousness. And how do we understand if it's Krishna testing? Because I've noticed Kalachandji really tests a lot. And I cannot tell if they're tests or they're things telling me, hey, this isn't working, like, don't do this. Mm-hmm. And how do we tell the difference between Krishna's tests and him, like, even this thing with Dhruva Maharaj, and when Narada Muni stopped him to kind of test him, he had to have that strong inner knowing and that strong faith that what he was doing was correct. Otherwise, he could have seen it as, oh, Krishna is telling me this might be too dangerous or something, and then that wouldn't have happened. So how do we develop that strong inner knowing faith and to be able to see between the tests and the warnings?
Well, I think we have to accept that, you know, unlike many of the saints that I read about growing up, the heavens may not part and we may not hear a voice telling us where to go and what to do. And that's really what we want. Knowing your dilemma is important, and to just continually pray about it. Seriously, that's all you can do, is continually pray and say, I'm very confused, I'm not sure, should I do this or should I do that? And but then you have to use your own mental faculties, right? You have to be aware of what your options are as you continue to pray and ask for guidance and ask for guidance. And probably the answer you get will be very subtle. It probably won't be like, oh, the perfect job happens, and then, you know, and oh, now I can stay. It maybe you have to take some different steps of maybe this thing is opening here, I can try and apply, and maybe that'll bide me some time, and then later something better opens up. It's really much about your own personal process in praying. You know, when I first moved to Dallas, we moved during COVID, and we were pretty sure that this, I mean, we wanted to be here. We made the decision that we wanted our daughter to go to Gurukul. There were really only a couple Gurukuls in the United States. Anyway, we decided on Dallas. We'd come to visit, and then we moved here. And I remember it was taking longer than I thought to get a job. Like, I had this expectation that I'm from New York City. I have this cool title on my resume. Everybody in Dallas is gonna want me, right? Everybody wants someone from Manhattan to work at their company. And I was spending hours a day sending resumes, and I was getting no response. For like 3 weeks, nothing. And every day all I was doing was applying. And I started to sweat. I started to think, am I not supposed to be here? Did I make a mistake? How are we gonna afford this? I really can't afford to go back. And the pandemic's really bad in New York. I don't know. So I just kept applying, and I prayed, and I chanted my rounds every day, and Raseshu and I would go to Temple Park every day, and I would stop in front of Tamal Krishna Maharaj's Samadhi, because at the time I don't think we even went into temple very much. They only allowed a couple people in, and you had to wear a mask. Anyway, I used to talk to Tamal Krishna Goswami every day, and I used to say, you have such a beautiful community here, and please, if it's, you know, I don't know if I'm even allowed to pray to you, but if it's possible, if you could help me stay here, I would really, really like that. And eventually, slowly, things did change. But the only thing I could do was pray, you know? And I did confide in other devotees. I'm getting really stressed now. you know. And they were there for me. They said, we understand. No, College Chandra is so powerful. It's going to be okay. And you know what? But if the money had run out and I didn't have a job, I would have had to make a different decision, right? And that would have been my answer. But things changed. Hare Krishna. Krishna Jumna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thanks for the wonderful class. I was thinking kind of on that point. I guess maybe for like not the so big of a life-changing decision, but like in the day-to-day. I see sometimes devotees are wondering like, you know, what's right, what's too much, what's too little, you know, oh, if I watch TV, you know, does God want me to do that? Is Super Soul like allowing me to, or things like that? So it's not so like dramatic or life-changing. And yeah, I just found that often a lot of times just Super Soul helps me know where I should be, because I can really just feel it. Like I can feel when I've wasted time. I can feel when I've spaced out for hours. I can feel like when I'm in the wrong place. It's like very evident. And or also, you know, you can feel when you've been productive. You can feel when you're actually practicing properly. So I appreciate when I hear that sometimes, because you know, I might not always have so much access to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra on if I should eat this candy or not, but I always have that Super Soul feeling, or that, you know, some kind of feeling that lets me know. It's like my compass, you know, it lets me know if I'm going overboard, or if I'm, you know, oh, I'm being too austere now or something. So I just, yeah, I thought.
That's really nice. Yeah, you felt.
I was thinking, you know, Krishna's not like a micromanager. If your choices are in the realm of devotional service, certain things are up to you. And Krishna wants to see what you want to choose. Like I asked Radhanath Swami, my guru, one time, oh, should I do service here or there? Like, you know, this temple or that temple? Or it could even be like, this, should I do this service or that service? And he said that if you're engaged in devotional service, I'm happy. So certain, like, you know, we're not like puppets. Certain things are in our sphere to choose how we want to please Krishna, where we want to please Krishna. Krishna's not, that's just what comes to mind. He's not a micromanager.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. That reminds me of, in I'll Build You a Temple, the Juhu story by His Holiness Giriraj Swami. At some point at the book, I don't know, he was able to decide where he wanted to serve, and he was thinking, what does Prabhupada really want me to do? Because Prabhupada asked him an open-ended question: where would you like to go? Where would you like to serve? And Giriraj Swami's like, I want to do the thing that pleases Prabhupada the most. But he thought and he prayed and he thought and he prayed and he thought and he prayed, and he said no answer was coming. He had no clue what was going to please Prabhupada the most. So he tried to test Srila Prabhupada. He was like, well, you know, the home programs and the Making Life members in Madras is going so well, so I was thinking I would just stay here and do that. Prabhupada said, very nice. And then he was like, I forget where the second city was. He was like, but then again, you know, I really found it really exciting to be over here with these God brothers and doing this. And so I was thinking maybe I should just be there. And Prabhupada said, very nice. And then Giriraj Swami said, okay, well, also, the Bombay Pundals have been such a huge success, and I think I'm an asset to that team, and I could really help with the building of the Juhu temple. And Prabhupada said, very nice. And then Giriraj Swami said he felt really ashamed that he had tried to test Srila Prabhupada. And ultimately, he thought that he should choose, I think he decided to choose Juhu because he knew it was the thing that scared him the most. It was the thing that he was scared to do because it was going to be such a struggle. But he realized that project was so important to Srila Prabhupada. So even if he did fail, it was so important to Srila Prabhupada. So he chose that. Okay, that's time. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Sorry, I almost forgot. I just wanted to take a quick moment to welcome Diego, our new Krishna House resident. Wonderful to have you here. Jai. We're very grateful and happy to have you here in the community. Thank you so much. Welcome. Hare Krishna.